to give you a few-minute update on particularly the PPP loan, because I know many of you and your organizations are coming to the conclusion of what's called the covered period. You've spent the money and you're starting to really think about forgiveness. So let's go through a couple things. First of all, the PPP loan is still available until the end of this month. It has to be submitted to the SBA by June 30th. There's still $100 billion that has not been dispersed. So if your organization has not done it, or if you know of another organization that's struggling, probably today is the absolute deadline to get it into a financial institution, but the 30th is the last day to get it into the SBA. Also EIDL loans, those are the longer term loans at about 3% for 30 years. Those loans, the portal is open again at the SBA, so those are also, can apply for those. There's no restriction. If you've applied for a PPP loan, you can also apply for an EIDL loan. Let's talk about some of the changes that were put in place at the beginning of this month. You may have heard of them. The first one is that the requirement that PPP money be spent 75% for payroll, that was reduced to 60%. So if you're using 60% of your PPP money for payroll, 60% or more, you're eligible for forgiveness. The other 40%, or what remains, can be used for rent, for mortgage payments, and for utilities. Remember, utilities is broadly defined. So that reduced that percentage from 75 to 60%. The other thing the SBA did, a little bit confusing, but we'll try to work through it. What was called the covered period, that was the period in which you had to spend the money, was originally 8 weeks from the time you received it. The SBA has opened that period up, and you have now 24 weeks from the time you received it. So for organizations that were not able to fully staff up or fully spend that PPP money, there's now a 24-week period. If you have received your loan after June 8th, after June 5th, it is 24 weeks. If you received it before June 5th, which is probably most people, you can take your choice of whether you want it's an 8-week period or a 24-week period. The last issue is that for loans issued after June 5th, the repayment period will be 5 years. For those loans that were issued and money received before June 5th, those loan repayments for what is not forgiven will still be 2 years, although lenders and borrowers are free to negotiate that. That's kind of an odd thing where SBA seems to be penalizing people who acted quickly to protect their organizations. At the same time, the SBA created a new application form. We went through the application form, rather convoluted one, last time we were on. They created an EZ form, which is a little bit easier, and we'll walk through that as we go through this presentation. So I want to just give you a 1, 2, 3 of where we are right now. So people are asking me a lot of questions I wanted to share. How do you apply for forgiveness? You apply to the institution where you borrowed the funds, not directly to the SBA. The best thing you can do right now is to contact that organization, that institution, find out what they're going to do, how they're going to process. The SBA has created these various forms and instructions, but we're expecting that most institutions will create an online portal and have their own system for processing the forgiveness provisions. When to apply? Essentially, you can apply anytime after the money is fully spent. And you have, the longest you want to wait is 10 months after your covered period. The reason I say that is because 10 months after the covered period finishes, you're going to have to start paying on that loan. So there's not an enormous rush to do it, but when you've spent the money, when you've been able to put together the, excuse me, the information, you can go ahead and submit your applications to your institutions. Now, what I wanted to focus on today for a few minutes is this new EZ application, because it's going to make your life and your organization's life a lot simpler if you qualify to use it. Just like the IRS creates the 1040 and the 1040 EZ, the SBA has created this EZ form and has set up some pretty straightforward requirements for who can use it. And let's walk through those real quickly. First of all, if you're self-employed, that's not going to be appropriate for any of our nonprofits. So let's look at the ones that do. If your organization did not reduce the wages of any employee more than 25%. Okay, that's the first gating one. That's if your organization did not reduce any employee compensation below 25% of what it originally was before February 15th, that's the first check. You can check that off. You may be eligible. The second has to do with what happened with your full-time employees. So here are the three tests for that. First test is you didn't reduce the number of your full-time employees from what it was in February. So if you had 10 employees in February and you have 10 employees when you file the loan, you're eligible to file the application. You're eligible to use the easy application. The third possibility is that, I'm sorry, so you didn't reduce your full-time employees at all. The second is that you reduced them, but you couldn't rehire them. So in other words, you had 10, let's say you're down to 5, you made efforts to rehire people. That can still get you into the easy loan. You have to show why you couldn't rehire them or some complication, but you can do that. And the third, which is the category that I think a lot of people will fall into if they have reduced their payroll, is that you experienced reductions in business activity as a result of federal health directives related to COVID-19. And that's going to be, it hasn't been well defined yet. We'll expect to see some more guidance. But essentially what the SBA appears to be saying is, if you did not reduce your wages for any employee below 25% of what it was, and if you could not fully staff your operations because of social distancing requirements or other closure requirements, that you still have the opportunity to file this easy loan and get all of your the money you spent on the PPP loan forgiven. So that's the requirements for the easy application. If your organization does not qualify for the easy application, you still, of course, can file the regular application, but that regular application is going to take some more work. It's going to probably take a very advanced bookkeeper or perhaps even an accountant a couple hours to go through it with you. A good bookkeeper can do it as well, but there's some complications. So you really want to look at the easy application. I know we're going to put up in the chat column the links to all of these. So there are 4 things you might be thinking about, which is the easy application, the easy instructions, the regular application, and the regular instructions. And again, this is always a moving target here. The SBA is constantly adjusting things. Some make it easier for us, some make it harder, but overall, you've got a sense of where we're going on this. And I'm going to stress one last thing. It's really critical that you're collecting documentation. Even though you may not apply for the forgiveness for some time, make sure you've got all your documentation that supports your initial loan and also supports your forgiveness. The key parts of that documentation are a payroll that goes for the entirety of this year. You want to have it all in there from January through current that shows by person what the payroll is, that shows how you use the PPP money to pay that payroll, shows a total so we can show that it was at least 60% of your PPP money was spent on payroll. The second is actual proof of your non-payroll expenses. So that would be including something like a copy of your lease, a copy of your mortgage, a copy of the various expenses that you did have. You need to have that. And finally, this is a new requirement, and I'm throwing it out there. They don't have specifics on it yet, but it's also worth at this point keeping in your file the various federal, state, county, and local guidances and regulations that were guiding you over the last 5 months, 4 months, as you run your business, because you're going to have to be able to show the bank and potentially the SBA why you couldn't operate your business at a full level if that's the case. So that was a really quick overview of where we are with PPP. Again, it is changing, but this easy application is really one that I think a lot of organizations will be able to use, and it will make things very simple and move that process along very quickly. And once you submit a loan forgiveness application to your banking institution, they have about 60 days to process that, ask you more questions before they make a determination.